We are very honored to have Professor Gallab here with us today. He received his PhD in sociology from Brigham Young University in 1997. He also received an MA in communications from BYU and his bachelor's degree from Boston University. And he's also done some university studies at the University of Khartoum in Khartoum, Sudan. Professor Gallab has taught a number of courses dealing with current social problems, the sociology of international development, multiculturalism in the media, Africa, communications and development, as well as minority voices in the media, just to name a few. He has been published prodigiously on Islam, race relations, as well as Sudan and African issues. Today we're very pleased to have Professor Gallab, who will be talking about the Quran in Muslim everyday life. We also remind you that because this is being webcast on Newsnet, that if there are questions at the end, that you wait until Marilyn Reynolds can bring you the microphone so that they can be picked up for our viewing audience at home. And also to let you know, it's cramped quarters today. Audio is available in the foyer, and these lectures are all archived so that you can catch the replay of that on the web at Newsnet or on the Kennedy Center's website. Professor Gallab.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. The issue which I'm going to talk about has been an issue in my life. It's part of my life, part of my everyday performance and experience, and I have been thinking about it for some time. So what I'm going to do is to give you the introductory part of a project which I am involved in, and I would like to do something about for the coming few months, if things allowed me to do that, and if God allowed me to do that. The Quran, and I would say the Quran because this is the Arabic pronunciation of the term, is in every aspect of the Muslim life. And for the last 14 centuries, the Quran has played an important role in the everyday life of every individual Muslim. And I will start by giving you just a brief idea about the Quran and how Muslims recite the Quran. And I will choose one of the surahs. Surah is a chapter, which is this surah, Muslims, they start their day with and they end their day with also. So normally every individual or every observing Muslim recites this surah at least about 20 times a day. And the surah is called Al-Fatiha. That means the opening. And the reciter is one of the very respected reciters in the sound. You can't get audio on the computer. Is it easy to hear that? Okay, what is the Quran? The term Quran came from the Arabic word qara'a, which means to read. And Prophet Muhammad, at the beginning of his mission as a prophet, he was commanded to read. And the surah says, read in the name of thy Lord and Cherisher, who created human being out of a leash-like cloth. Read, and thy Lord is the most bountiful, he who taught the use of the pen, taught man, a human being, that which he knew not. In the 17, Surah 17, which is the resurrection, Muhammad was commanded to initiate the verses of the Quran according to the recitation he heard. It is for us to collect it and recite it, but when we have recited it, follow thou its recital as proclaimed. The Quran has other names, and one of the names is the book, al-kitab. And the book, this naming functions as the symbol of the prophetic heritage, the common memory of salvation history which Muslims now share with the Christians and Jews. This according to Daniel Matko. And through time, God revealed several books. Those books include the David Zabur, the Moses Torah, and the Jesus Injil, and the Muhammad Quran. And the people who believe in that are called people of the book, or Ahl al-Kitab in Arabic. And the people of the book, they are also called people of the Wahy. The Wahy, the Arabic term Wahy, means the revelation, and the revelation through which God communicated through prophets and apostles. And the Quran says, indeed, we communicate to you just as we communicated Awhayna to Noah and the prophets after him, as we communicated to Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob and the tribes and Jesus and Job and Jonah and Aaron and Solomon, and as we granted to David the Zabur. Both people of the book and people of the Wahy, Ahl al-Kitab and Ahl al-Wahy, are described in the Quran as, or their books are described as as-Suhuf al-Ula, the former books of revelation, and that is the books of Abraham and of Moses and the other prophets. The Quran also is called al-Zikr, and that is the reminding or the reminder of the teachings of God. So Ahl al-Kitab, or the people of the book, they are Ahl al-Zikr. So God sent through prophets and apostles his symbol of knowledge and authority in order to call humanity to guidance, which is hadi, a privileged insights into God's knowledge and authoritative decree in order to remind, which is zakir, and make clear what God requires, and to warn, that is yundir, of the coming judgment. The Quran is called Tanzil, and Tanzil means descent or sent down or given to. which is the very act of revelation from the God to the prophets. It is an indication of being directly sent from a transcendental God. This leads to the Muslim concept that all God's revelation has been tanzil, descent from the archetypal kitab, which is in Arabic called Kitab, or the preserved tablet, al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, which involved the noble scribes. The Quran describes it as the books held greatly in honor, exalted in dignity, kept pure and holy, written by the hands of the scribes, honorable and pious and just. So also it's called Furqan, and that means the discriminating proof between right and falsehood. Several other names are mentioned in the Quran that describe the Quran and its function, and some of them include Huda, which is guidance, Shifa, which is healing, Rahmah, which is mercy, Mubarak, which is blessing, Mubin, which is clear, Bushra, which is good tidings, Aziz, which is mighty, Majid, which is gracious or glorious, Bashir, which is bringer of good tidings, Nazir or Nazir, which is warner, Ahsan al-Qawl or Ahsan al-Hadith, the best of speech, and Hakim, full of wisdom, and Kareem, gracious, and Nur, which is light. The Quran is a text of 114 verses, chapters, and each chapter is called Surah, and each one of these chapters, except one, starts with the introductory invocation, Bismillah, in the name, or Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful and the compassionate. The surah, in turn, or all the surahs in turn, are composed of 6,000 verses, and in Arabic they are called ayahs. Individual surah can contain just a few verses or a few hundreds. The variation in length, wow, I forgot completely about. Okay. The variation in length is noteworthy because the Quran, as a text, we call the text Mus'haf, uses the length as an organizing principle. So the text is arranged by the descending order of surah length. So the longer surah appears earlier in the text, while the very shorter ones toward the end. The Quran was revealed to Muhammad through the agency of the archangel Jibril, or Jibril in Arabic, over a period of 22 years. The early Meccan period, which is named after Mecca, the city of Mecca, where Prophet Muhammad was born, and he started his mission, and he was there till from the Meccan period from 610 to 622. The surahs are among the shortest, and they were revealed at the beginning of Muhammad's mission. They tend to stress in highly moving language the internal themes of the unity of God, the necessity of faith, the punishment of those who stray from the right path, and the last judgment when all humans' actions and beliefs will be judged. The second period, which is the Medina period, from the year 622 to the year 632, are among the longest, often deal in detail with specific legal, social, or political situations, and sometimes can only be properly understood with a full knowledge of the circumstances in which they were revealed. And actually part of the Quranic science is to understand or to know exactly the asbab al-nuzul, why this specific surah or this specific ayah or this specific section has been revealed. And this is part of the Quranic sciences. From the time the Quran was revealed, from the very early time, the Prophet dictated its text to a group of scribes called Kutab al-Wahy, the scribes of the revelation. And Muhammad's companions memorized the Quran as time went by. Many of those who embraced Islam started memorizing it as well. So the memorizers of the Quran are described as Huffaz al-Quran, the memorizers of the Quran. And up to this very day, there are some people who memorize the full text of the Quran. I memorized one fourth of it by the time when I was 5. After that, I was taken to school, to regular school, so they don't give that much attention to. The Quran was collected into a single book during the time of Uthman ibn Affan, the 4th Caliph. That is, his reign was 644, 655, and copies of this original version were made and officially dispatched to the capitals of the Islamic world. Only 2 copies of that text exist today. One of them is in Istanbul and the other one in Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan. The written text is called Mus'haf. Muhammad Arkun, he is a scholar at the Sorbonne. He was at the Sorbonne, and he's an authority in Islamic studies. Explained that the Mus'haf is the closed official corpus according to procedures developed and supervised by scholars. Official because they resulted from a set of decisions taken by authorities, recognized by the community, and it is closed because nobody was permitted any longer to add, subtract a word, or to modify a reading in the corpus now declared authentic. And this is very significant. All Muslims, whatever their sect, country, or language, have always had exactly the same Arabic Mus'haf. No 2 copies of the Mus'haf anywhere in the world differ in any way. So, according to Arkun, the Word of God, which is in Arabic called Kitab, is the source of all salvation. And the salvation history through time from Kitab, or the Word of God, to the earthly history. At the same time, we have the Quran, as a revelation, and through the closed official corpus and the interpretive corpus, the Quran goes also as part of the earthly history. So that means the revelation has been all through. The Quran is one of the revelation, and the Quran creates its interpretive community, and through this interpretive community creates that unity of the salvation history. The contents of the Quran are varied and ordered within a unique pattern. It tells about God, His attributes, human beings and their position in the universe, men and women, society, and other beings, and how they stand in relation to God, to their fellow beings, to belief, the next life, histories of previous nations and their prophets, guidance, law, regulations on everyday subjects such as family life, business dealings, the law, war and peace, women's rights, hygiene, governance, and system of consultation. Arkun divides that. He says that the Quran conceals a profound semiotic order. He distinguishes the following 5 types of discourse: prophetic, legislative, narrative, sequential, and hymnal. The pattern of the Quranic action is as follows. Number 1, God is one. And the Quran says, and your God is one God, there is no God but He, most gracious, most merciful. Number 2, religion is one. And I think that diagram, explains that better. So religion is one. And according to the Quran, it says, say ye, we believe in Allah and the revelations given to us, and Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes, and that given to Moses and Jesus, that given to all prophets from their Lord. We make no difference between one and another of them, and we submit to Allah. Number 3, humanity is one. All human beings were created from one soul, nafs. Number 4, human beings are endowed with the capacity to create conditions that could free or restrain them. And number 5, human history, as the wahy is a universal property of life, which is revelation, a universal property of life. The prime mover of human history is consciousness induced through revelation or through wahy. And from this, I will try to construct the Muslim life world. The Muslim life world, or the life world, is the world of everyday life in which we operate with what Alfred Schultz describes as the natural attitude. We take this order for granted and we do not doubt its existence. Through consciousness, people establish meaning, understanding, interpret, and engage in self-interpretation. And here I would like to address only 2. I hope that I can do the 2. Number 1, the flow of the unique time in the Muslims' individual and group of everyday life. And number 2 is how the Muslim individuals and groups operate within their life world. The first one the Muslim unique time is the time of the wahy, the time of the revelation. And the time of the wahy is the time of great transformations. Number one, the first transformation happened to Muhammad. He was transformed from an ordinary human being to a prophet. And this transformation led to a series of other transformations. These are the organic transformations. During the process of the transformation, Muhammad switches worlds. But whenever he returns to our world, he returns to insert himself into the sweep of time with a view to control the forces of history and thereby create a fresh world of ideals. So whenever he goes to the wahy time, he comes to our time with some kind of creative ideals that could change our life and could change our everyday life. Secondly, in him as a prophet and his everyday performance, Muslim life in its elementary forms as well as its everyday patterns and developments has been discovering an everlasting source of knowledge guiding its ongoing directions. Okay? And accordingly, everything Muhammad has said, which is called hadith, everything he has said during his prophethood, and everything he did or did not, which is called sunnah, has become the second authoritative source of Islam. The first authoritative source is the Quran. The second authoritative source is the hadith and the sunnah, which is the tradition. But neither the hadith nor the sunnah has been considered by Muslims as closed official corpus. Thirdly, the political and the administrative acumen of Muhammad, particularly in Medina, as a head of a state, has created the condition for a universal model on the basis dictated in the Medina constitution. When Muhammad went to Medina, he became the head state, and the state was composed of Muslims, Christians, Jews, and people who belong to other religions. So, and that group was called Ummah. And the Ummah that made the new state, Ummah means community, that made the new state in its moral and ecological implications was multi-religious and multicultural. The new emerging Ummah and the Pax Islamica, which emerged out of that, were inclusive of Jews of Medina, the Christians of Najran, granting them their identity and their religious, social, and cultural institutions. The Sahifa, which is the constitution of the Medina, included among the above-mentioned groups those who had not become Muslims. Fourthly, the Medina model was possible as a prototype of Ummatun Wasat, a mid-most community balanced and standing as a kind of model among other communities in relation to God and mankind. Thus, the Quran says, "Thus we have made of you an ummah justly balanced, that ye might be witnesses over the nations and the messenger over yourself." And the Medina model reflects the Quranic ideals, which is egalitarian, humanitarianism, social justice, economic justice, righteousness, and solidarity. The second transformation, which is, I call the primary transformation. The primary transformation was the transformation of the group, the community, from a millah or a tribe into an ummah, which is a covenant people. And at the heart of the ummah is the body of men and women who had known and accompanied Prophet Muhammad during his life and made the first generation of the ummah. And they are called in Arabic Sahaba, that means the companions, or as-Salaf as-Salih, which is the pious ancestries. So the Sahaba and their lived experience represent the fourth source in matters of Islamic decision-making, as well as for guidance and guidelines about personal piety and everyday conduct. So we have the Quran as the first source, we have the Hadith, and we have the Sunnah, and we have the Sahaba. The second primary transformation was the transformation of the language. The Arabic language from a vernacular to a language, and from a language concerned with the interpretation and expressive forms of the natural world to a language that accomplishes the natural, symbolic, and the supernatural forms of existence. It translated the divine reality into the reality of everyday life. And for that reason, it seems to me that Muslims were very reluctant to translate the Quran into any other language, although now it's translated. The second thing about the transformation of the language was the written language. So after the Quran, literacy became a requirement, and it converted living sentences into thought objects that transcended face-to-face communication and the constraints of time and place. So in conclusion, the Quran is the prime mover of Muslim consciousness. The manner in which the Quran is manifested in the consciousness of the Muslim everyday life could be summarized in the following. 1. God's infinite knowledge as preserved in al-Kitab, which holds up the entire undetermined possibilities of knowledge as a present reality, revealing itself in serial time as a succession of finite concepts appearing to each to reach a unity in which is already present in them. The process keeps alive within it the flame of aspiration and sustains it in its endless pursuit. The principal aspect of this pursuit in Islam is known as jihad. And the scholars, those who exert, that means make an effort, that is jihad, God says we show our path to them, pass knowledge to everyday life. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
There are a number of countries these days that are talking, or Islamist movements that are talking about setting up Islamic government. To what extent could the Constitution of Medina be an example or a model, a paradigm for these governments? Is it suited for the 21st century?
Yeah, that's a very good
Could you give
question.
us some
Yeah,
guidance
that's a good
on this?
question. I will start with my own, with my own country. And actually, Hassan al-Turabi, who was, for those of you who are interested in or they know about the Islamist movement, Hassan al-Turabi was considered as one of the global leaders of the Islamists, and he has been preaching the Medina model for a very long time. And when he came to power through a military coup. He established a totalitarian system that has nothing to do with Medina, and actually he sanctioned some kind of jihad against Sudanese citizens because they disagree with him or because they have a different religion. Actually, those who suffered a lot, those in the south who were Christians and non-Muslims, and those who disagreed with him. The other thing about, I think the Medina model is only a model because Muhammad did not choose any person to talk over after his death. And I will argue that the government, the Islamic, the government in a Muslim country is a secular government. And actually, the first 4 caliphs who were chosen through some kind of consensus, they were chosen not as divine rulers, but as secular rulers ruling a country which is a state which was multicultural and multi-religious. Yes.
Okay, right here. How strong is the concept or the ideology of a return to the time of Muslim, the Ummah Muhammadiyah, of going back to of those days? I mean, is that a strong sentiment that's more amongst the middle class? Is that what the Islamic fundamentalists pursue, or who are the ones that are trying to get to that point?
Well, within the Islamic imagination, of course, that time is considered as the best of times, and this is the time of inspiration and the time which could inspire every Muslim, whether we are talking about the behavior or the performance of the Sahaba, the companions, or the caliphs, or the Prophet himself. But there are a lot of things to do with looking back into that time. There are some people who look at it just to enforce some kind of an ideology, which does not read the whole thing carefully. An ideology which is isolationist, which in essence some kind of fundamentalist. And I will argue that most of the Islamists, they look at Islam as an ideology that could help them to rally people around them for their own cause. Of course, they reinterpret some of the traditions, but they are very selective in this respect. And in this case, I think what they are trying to do is somewhat dangerous. For example, if you take Osama bin Laden as an example, and Osama bin Laden represents a group of Muslims who try to use Islam as an ideology, and he looks at the world as Muslims against non-Muslims, believers and disbelievers. Of course, you can say that President Bush looked at the world that way, but that's another story. But that is very dangerous because there are multiple realities and there are multiple groups in the world and in the Islam itself.
Do you feel that the Sharia law is a fair translation of the principles of the Quran into legal guidelines for everyday life?
Well, if you want to ask it that way, yes, it is fair. But what is Sharia? There are a lot of people talk about, when they talk about Sharia, they talk about different things. For example, there are some people, when they talk about Sharia, they talk about amputations and capital punishment and these kind of things. But the Sharia itself is this corpus of knowledge, and the law is only one part of it. And it includes everything in the Muslim life, from using your toothbrush to the most sophisticated and complicated things. So if you are talking about the implementation of Sharia within specific Middle Eastern governments, and who only choose from Sharia amputations and punishment, and what one day the dictator of my country, his name Jafar Nimeri, said that the Sharia al-Kaaba, the bad Sharia, we are going to implement the bad Sharia, which is some kind of punishment. That's another thing. That is something I don't think that a lot of Muslims agree with. But if you talk about Sharia and its different and its complexity and how it covers the Muslim everyday life, and as a guidance for them, that is, I don't think that any Muslim will disagree with that.
I thought the point you made that there's one fixed text that's remained constant is very interesting, but still you have a wide variety of everyday life. And
Right.
some of that could derive from different methodologies for interpreting that text, but also custom and different cultures could also influence this array of behavior. To what extent do you think the methodology versus custom versus different emphasis explain the variation in everyday behavior?
Yeah, I think it has a great role in that. And actually, culture, number one, Muslims, there is 1.2 billion Muslims in the world. They don't speak one language. They don't live in one country. They belong to, they have different political affiliations and even aspirations. Some of them are very poor, among the poorest, like in Bangladesh, and some of them are among the wealthiest, like in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. So there are a lot of variables that sometimes act separately and sometimes act together to give different interpretations, and sometimes selectivity. For example, there are very important issues, like, for example, the issues of women, concerning women, or the issue concerning Sharia, for example. These are very these are some of the debated issues now in the Islamic world. If you go by the text provides equality and a lot of rights, because women, they have rights the same way men have rights. There are duties the same way men have duties. So they are equal, as Donnelly has said in one of our papers, they are equal in duty and punishment. Anyway, So if you go to five, for example, 5 Islamic countries, you will find different forms of behavior or different attitudes towards women, and some of them, they try to legitimize, especially those who are very aggressive and against women, they try to legitimize, they try to handpick certain verses of the Quran, and they try to reinvent them so as to suit what they are doing. So I think culture plays a very important role, politics plays an important role, power plays an important role, but at the same time, the text is one. Sometimes people, when they don't find what they are looking for in the text, they go to the hadith, for example, or go to the sunnah, or sometimes they try to reread certain things from the past, as the one caliph has done or whatever, so as to support their argument. Yes.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about jihad and what the Quran says about that, and that seems to be a often used phrase. If you could clarify that one for me.
Yeah. And that is, I think, one of the words that that received a lot of attention during the last 2 years, especially after September 11th. The term jihad comes from the word jihad, and jihad means an effort. And jihad means to exert an effort, and this effort could be, number one, that if the Quran says, وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادًا كَبِيرًا, that use the Quran as jihad to support your argument. So the Quran could provide you with an argument. So that is one meaning of jihad. Then jihad could be against yourself, that you try to perfect yourself, and that is a form of jihad. Jihad could be exerting an effort to help your family. And jihad could be some sort of defense, because in the Quran there is no holy war, and there is no offensive war, because offensive war means aggression. And aggression, God abhors aggression. In Allah la yuhibbul al-udwan, and God abhors aggression. So jihad could be a defensive war, and the defensive war has got its own regulations and could be sanctioned through a process. So jihad could mean every one of those.
You spoke of Ummah. Is Ummah more seen then as the group that you live around, or is it now the Muslim people as all over the world in all different kind of cultures?
Well, I try to develop some kind of understanding of the Ummah, how it developed through time. At the beginning, of course, the Ummah was the small group which was transformed from some kind of tribal affiliation into religious solidarity. And then it developed into a community, that is the community of the Medina, was considered as some kind of an Ummah. And then it developed as some kind of an imagined community, which is the entire Muslim community is called as an Ummah. So each one of those could mean an Ummah.
So your Ummah could be those that you live right around who are not Muslim?
Yes, within, of course, now there is a lot of debate about that. And, but within, if we take the Medina model, that the Medina model created that Ummah, which is the citizenship was the primary of that model. You have Christians and Jews and non-Muslims and Muslims, and so they are one community, and they accepted some kind of a social contract, and that contract was the Medina Sahifa, which is the Medina Constitution. And the Medina Constitution is some kind of a secular constitution, which is some kind of an agreement between those groups. And that agreement made them some kind of an ummah. But at the same time, you can say that an ummah could be based on faith. But it could be, I think it could be based on citizenship or multi-religious or multicultural grouping. Yes? Well, I can tell. My TA has. Yeah.
In the Quran, if I understand correctly, it mentions humans and also jinn. I think, if that's how you. Could you just explain what that means?
Yeah, humans. We are human beings, and jinn. Of course, there are the other beings who live within this universe. There are other beings who live within the universe. Actually, the Quran talked about some kind of an ecological there is some kind of ecological concepts, and these ecological concepts could include, there are things that we know, there are things that we don't know. And some of the things that we don't know, there are certain things that we don't see. But that if we don't see, that doesn't mean that they are not there. The Quran tells us that they are within our universe. There are other beings who live with us, and those beings are called jinn. So the jinn could be what's the translation of jinn?
It's just jinn.
It's jinn.
Spirits,
Yeah.
jinn. They're not necessarily evil.
Yeah. Yeah. According to the Quran, they may be good, they may be bad, but they create some kind of a nation by itself. And that nation is all over the place. And sometimes they influence our life, sometimes they don't. And there is a surah about the jinn. Yes?
What's the role of Ishmael and Isaac? I know she mentioned them both, and I've heard many explanations by institute teachers, but I want to know what you in.
Muslim culture. Ishmael is the father of the Arabs, and Isaac is the father of the Jews. One relates to the father, and the other one relates to the mother. Ishmael, he and his father built the Kaaba, which is the most sacred shrine in Islam, and actually they were the one who built Mecca. So Mecca, before their presence, Ishmael and his mother, and later his father, was some kind of just a burned place. Later, after they built the Kaaba, and there are a lot of miracles about that, people started to come to that place, and it became a center. All or most of the Hajj rituals represent or commemorate the relationship between Ishmael and his father, or Ishmael and his mother. For example, there is a well called Zamzam. The well, the water sprang out the first time when Ishmael was a toddler, and he was thirsty, and his mother was running to the caravan routes and coming back to him. The seventh time, water erupted from the area where he was, or where his legs were kicking. So that well has been there for all of time, and that route that she did 7 times is done by the Muslim pilgrimage every year in memory of the relationship of the mother and her child. The other thing, which is the, for example, Rami Jamrat, which is one of the last rituals that when the pilgrims go and they throw stones into certain place, that commemorates the relationship between Ismail and his father. When his father saw in a dream that to sacrifice his son, the Satan tried to persuade him, so he threw stones towards him. That is also commemorates this kind of relationship. The house, the Kaaba itself, was built by them. So the whole rituals, and actually the last day of pilgrimage, every Muslim family who has the ability, they slaughter a ram or a lamb in memory of that relationship. So it's the whole Abrahamic legacy, and the whole Ishmael and Hagar's legacy is a fundamental part of the Islamic faith.
And that was all like he sacrificed Ishmael? And that was Abraham and Hagar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, what are the biggest challenges that face Muslims in America today?
This is a very good question. Well, there are 7 million Muslims in the United States. And up to this moment, Muslims in the United States are either racialized or conceived as followers of an alien religion. Most of the time, when people talk about Muslims, they talk about Middle Easterns. And they try to make some kind of a relationship between Muslims and Arabs. And then there is another relationship between Arabs and terrorism, and so on. So the lack of recognition is, I think, is behind a lot of problems that most Muslims, or some of the Muslims in the United States face. If there is any kind of recognition for them as part of the American multicultural and part of Islam is a religion followed by some Americans, at least 7 million, which is more than some denominations. That means Islam is an American religion. If Islam is considered as American religions, and Muslims are considered as Americans, I think that could have solved a lot of problems, and at least could provide for some kind of an environment which is conducive to more understanding and more exchange of cultural and religious experiences, and that could benefit and strengthen the American pluralism or American culture, multiculturalism. Yes.
I just came back from a conference where
There's a mic.
I just returned from a conference where a number of
criminologist claimed that the Muslim mosques around the country are being used as major places where they indoctrinate, I think that was their term, and train terrorists. What's your reaction to that, Professor?
Well, you need a lot of information to say that is true or not. But actually, the mosque, normally the mosque is a place which is open for everybody. And even the administration of the mosque is not some kind of a permanent job for anybody. It's some kind of voluntary work. There are some Muslims who have some kind of strong views, and some of them, they have even some kind of wrong views about a lot of things. And within the tension that's taking place now, some Muslims have been radicalized, have been saying that after September 11th, popularity of Osama bin Laden was close to zero, if not zero. Now, there are a lot of people who sympathize with him for a variety of reasons. There might be some Muslims who try to use the mosque for other reasons than worship. But to my understanding, there are other Muslims who will not accept that, because all those mosques were built by those communities. And people of those communities, they have a right to say yes or no for any kind of practice that people practice there. But I'm sorry, Alpha, it's very difficult for me to give you some kind of a better answer. But I have been to several mosques. At least in Ohio, there are a number of mosques around me. You might find some people who could constitute or could be qualified for being fundamentalists, but that is some kind of that is their choice, their views. If they try to go a step further to use the mosque for something which is not sanctioned to, I think there are a lot of people who could stand and try to stop them. Yes.
I was just curious, as a practicing Muslim yourself, what your worship experience is like here in Utah. And for example, Friday, the Muslim Sabbath, and what is that like for you here?
Well, actually, since I came to this place in 1990, I found that there is some kind of good relations between the university and the small Muslim community. It's a very small Muslim community, and they are provided a place to do their Friday prayer. Whenever they need some kind of space or help, I think the university has been very good to them, and I think most of them have been good to the university. And most of the students who come here, I think they come for very good reason, that this is a good school, and they try to be good students and to respect their host community. So I haven't I haven't experienced any kind of a problem, and I have here a number of good friends, so we spent the last 10 to 13 years, Jack? So I think as myself, as one of this community, I think we are very appreciative of what we receive.
Here in Provo, your worship services are
Just yeah, but because most of the Muslim community are students. There are very few people who are not students or who are not BYU affiliated, but they normally come here Friday. You have about 20 something or 30 more, 40, 45. Something. Yeah, that's a very small group. Yeah. What's that? Well, Hiram actually is about 1,000 students. So, actually, the entire Hiram village. Hiram village has only one traffic light, and I think there are about 10 to 11 Muslim students.
And there, we'll let Professor Gallab go to his class, and thank you all, and thank Professor Gallab.